big business, the rich people, the richest people in the world want far right politicians. And I think if they
still,
absolutely, without question.
Comedian Stavros Halkias was on Theo Vance show and showcased that the Democratic Party should hire him because this guy knows how to actually communicate issues on a level that people who, this is not a criticism of Theo Von, but people who aren't very intelligent can't understand. So Theo Von, if you don't know who Theo Von is, he's a comedian and seems like a nice guy. Doesn't seem all that bright. But again, that isn't to criticize him. That's simply to showcase most people aren't really aware of what's going on in politics, don't really understand it. Stavros here, though, I think does such a good job of communicating a couple of different issues. One, the first one we'll get to here, and then he also discusses JD Vance, which is hilarious. So they're both great. But let me start with this clip here. And I'm going to, against my better judgment, I'm also going to contrast this with someone who, at least recently, I don't think has been doing a very good job at communicating with the right as much as he is trying to. But again, that's just to showcase the inability of that individual to do what he's trying to do and contrast that with somebody who's doing it well in Stavros here. So let me start with this clip.
I think you can really see stuff that we take for granted as progress. Gay marriage is another thing. There's a really weird cultural, I think this is what happens anytime the party that's backed by the powers that be, big business, the rich people, the richest people in the world want far right politicians. And I think if they
still,
absolutely, without question.
I feel like tech is now. I just feel like the parties
Elon
have
Musk
changed.
is a huge Trump guy.
That's a good point.
I think rich people will support whoever's in power, number one, but they want to transfer wealth from the poor to the rich. They've been really good at doing it. The biggest issue, I think the reason the Democrats lost is because they pretend that there is no problem. I think inflation, a big part of inflation is that companies realize they can just charge you more and say it's somebody else's fault. A lot of it's price gouging. That's true. And
everything gets so much more expensive.
And companies are, some of it is just real inflation, but some of it is companies are hiding behind inflation. And Democrats did nothing to stop price gouging, right? They didn't even say they were going to do it. You can't tell people that things are going good when they're just clearly not. The most important issue for people is that things are fucking more, they have no health care. Wage inequality is out of control. People's wages have not kept pace with how much bosses are earning.
Well, yeah. Well, what percent? Bernie Sanders said greatly that he thought if AI starts to happen for companies, right? So companies are making more money.
We don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you don't get anything and we keep all the fucking profits. And I do think, I think we talked about it a little bit last time where it's like AI as a tool to fucking do creative shit. It's so weird when it's like it should be making normal people's lives easier. It shouldn't just be for rich people to be able to charge less. Like there should be some protections for workers and we should be able to you should be able to buy a house. All these regular issues that weren't really hit on. It was just, well, you got to vote for us because the other person's worse. And even though I think that is true, that's not a winning message. That's nothing, especially when the other side is offering, they're at least saying shit's bad.
Well, yeah.
And they're saying it's for the wrong reasons.
All right. Great points there made by Stavros that, people, I've seen criticisms from people saying, oh, but she did talk about, price gouging. Yeah. In the first 2 weeks of her campaign, that was one of the issues that was really discussed. And then, as I discussed during the campaign, and as it was clear to everybody, Kamala Harris moved to the right while she was campaigning in the way she was messaging and the people she brought with her. Again, Liz Cheney, she did several events with Liz Cheney, and she lost by more votes in those districts where she brought Liz Cheney than expected because Republicans came out in greater numbers because they hate Liz Cheney. Everyone hates Liz Cheney. So it's just this. There was a way to, again, I don't want to revisit the election because I've done several videos now on the election, but there was a way to properly separate yourself from Joe Biden and the failures there while also taking on the upsides to his administration, like some of the progress made when it came to workers' rights, but also understanding that a lot of pandemic era programs that were helping people ended while Biden was president, and people directly felt that. That led to people thinking, when Kamala Harris is on The View saying, there's nothing I do differently than Joe Biden, then she just appears like a continuation of that, as opposed to someone who's actually going to take on, for example, the price gouging that she initially brought up in the campaign. So, contrast that with, let's be clear, the Republicans, of course, much worse on all those issues, but they use immigration as the excuse, right? Which is not the reason for anything, but they at least pinpoint something and fool enough people into thinking that they have the both the problem and the solutions down, whereas Democrats try to soft land that there are any problems at all. Now, let me share this as well. Actually, you know what? I'll end on this. This is more just a fun watch, where Stavros is talking about JD Vance. I want to get to contrasting that with Cenk Uygur. All right. Now, again, I'm not taking shots here. This is just, I want to be clear. There is a failure in communication here. So on one hand, you have Stavros, who's talking with a conservative, understands how to discuss these issues in a way that I think lands. On the other hand, you have Cenk here appearing to prop up Don Jr., who I know he knows is full of shit. But again, tweeting out, while the left is yelling at me to not work with MAGA, here's Don Jr. saying we should limit generals from working for defense contractors. That's a policy we've been pushing for and got nowhere with Democrats on. Who cares? Who cares who does it as long as it gets done? But it's not under Don. He's not for real. Why? What is the point of doing something like this, other than making conservatives be like, oh, look, even Cenk is agreeing here? That's not going to make them now agree with you when it comes to actual pro-working class policy. All this is doing is handing Don Jr. a win when he doesn't deserve one. I mean, look at this. Was my reply to this, because it's so ridiculous to pretend Don Jr. Is somehow going to be at the forefront of keeping neocons out. So this was another example where comedian Dave Smith, who I did a video on this guy, Trump voter, but he's a libertarian and he hates the neocons. So he was really encouraged by the Stop Pompeo movement and says he wants to keep all neocons out. Don Jr. he's on it. He's got it. This is right after the election. But while those discussions are going on, Brian Hook is the one who was running the national security transition team for Trump, who was a senior advisor to Mike Pompeo. And Mike Pompeo once praised him as a trusted advisor who achieved historic results against the Iranian regime. These are the people keeping the neocons out. And also went on to, expect to pick Rubio as his Secretary of State, a rabid neocon. So I don't see the point in trying to give any credit at all to these clowns. And then you have comments like this. Like, it continued. So there's an interaction between Cenk and Elon Musk on Twitter. And where Cenk's basically saying you should cut the Pentagon budget. And Elon Musk replies to him being like, do you have suggestions? I'll hear out your suggestions. Which he's not serious about, of course. But Cenk takes it seriously for some reason. And then says this: which side seems more open and inclusive? Based on a single conversation on Twitter where you were recognized by Lord Elon Musk, this has all of a sudden made you act like they're more open and inclusive. Yet, of course, these are the people that want to cut funding to women's rights, including women's health care, like Planned Parenthood. This article came out yesterday. This is where the cuts are actually going to come. Not deep into the Pentagon budget, but deep into women's health care. So why are we even pretending? Again, just very different attempts here at, courting conservative voters. I tend to believe the Stavros approach is much, much, much better. Here is that JD Vance clip. This is just a fun watch.
JD Vance was super cool when he came on the podcast. He's a human. Trump's hard to get to know.
I don't know that JD, to me, he seems like a traditional just say whatever it takes to get elected snake, to be honest with you. I know, you had him on, he was cool here, but he was a guy who said he hated Trump. He said some fucked up shit about women. Like, I just think he's and venture capitalist guys are fucking worms to begin with. I don't trust JD Vance at all. I think he's a piece of shit also.
Really?
So yeah. I mean, I think he's a cut in the regular ass Republican that'll say any fucking fucked up thing to get into power. He sucked Trump's after saying he called him Hitler or whatever. And he made a complete turn when he realized it was politically advantageous to be on Trump's side. I think he also is just a run of the mill piece of shit politician. Like,
fantastic. Fantastic to see. And yeah, that was after JD Vance was on Theo Von's podcast too. I got it, Theo Von, I think he's got a heart of gold. I think he means well. I really do. I just think he doesn't know what the fuck is going on. So it's good to have someone like, Stavros on there and really set him straight. Bernie Sanders was on Theo Von's podcast a few weeks ago. So he'll talk to anybody. Again, it's less about the host. It's less about Theo Von. It's the fact that Theo Von has a big podcast. He's, up there with Joe Rogan now in terms of popularity. So it's important to have voices like Bernie Sanders, Stavros, whoever it is, on there preaching a proper message, an educated message to a more conservative or apolitical audience.